I want to hear it all.
We're live now. Okay, thank you, Olivia. Good afternoon, everybody. This is the Senate Government Operations Committee. Wednesday, February 21st. We're getting started a little bit late because our floor session went longer than expected. We have a new draft of S55. Our Legislative Council Attorney Tucker Anderson will come and walk us through it, but I wanted to sort of set the stage for it before Tucker walks through all the details. So, as you know, we've heard a lot of testimony from that's the new version is 4.2, draft 4.2. Okay, is that what you got? Mm-hmm. Yes. We've gotten a lot of testimony from lots of local officials, from school boards and select boards and other local officials. We have BCA in here and others. We'll hear more. We have people in the room and on the screen that we'll hear from. But leading up to that, Senator Clarkson and I worked on another draft for the weekend and yesterday and today with Tucker I'll just go over the sort of basic structure of it, and then Tucker will go over the details. We heard testimony from many of the state boards that the hybrid meeting option is not a problem for them. That they can meet that like the legislature does, as we're demonstrating right now, that for state boards, that's not really a problem. So the hybrid requirement that we had in the bill for everybody before would stay in the bill for state board only, and only for those that are non-advisory. So they're making a legislative, quasi-judicial budget tax decisions, then they would be required to do the hybrid requirement. And they also, hey Tucker, I'm just going over the sort of review, and then you can go through the details. And then they also would be required to record and post those recordings. All state boards and state agencies have websites, so posting and doing that is not a problem for them, as far as we heard. And then for local boards, and that municipal boards, that would include town boards and school boards and all of their many committees and different things, there would still be the distinction between advisory and non-advisory. And the advisory ones that don't have tax, quasi-judicial, or budget and finance duties could meet in whatever format they found the most amenable. They could meet remotely, hybrid, or in person. For the other boards, the sort of big boards, so to speak, they would be able to meet, they would be required to meet in person, but they still could meet in hybrid form as long as they had a designated physical location. They could not meet fully remotely. That's the sort of distinction. And then there would be, and this is in this draft, and this is all still up for discussion, but that's the way this draft is. And then members of the public who wanted to attend the meeting could make a request for accommodation. And that would be saying, I know you're meeting only in person, but I can't attend in person. I need a remote link. And the town, as long as they requested it 3 days prior to the meeting in writing, the town or the school board or whoever it was would have to grant that access. Unless there is an emergency or a local incident. So local incident stays in there. The informational meetings that we had a lot of conversation about prior to town meetings or annual meetings would still, they would not have to be hybrid, but they would have to be recorded and have that recording posted so that people who needed to vote couldn't attend the meeting, could watch the video of the meeting so that they knew the information before they voted. And then there would be creation of a working group that would be chaired by the Secretary of State or her designee, and the working group would work through a lot of the other sort of remaining questions about best practices, how to get better participation, how to get more accessible meetings, how to get more people to run for local office, lots of different things. And they would report back to us, or whoever us is at that point, on November 1st, 2025. So a lot of the sort of open questions that we were grappling with would be put on. And give them a little bit of money to hire a consultant if they need to, but there would no longer be the grant program that was in the bill. In large part because what we're not asking the towns or telling the towns or the school boards that they have to do anything radically different than what they're doing right now. So, but the study committee could suggest, hey, a grant program would be nice, or good. So that's the general overview, and Tucker can talk through the local language of the bill more specifically. Are there any questions at this point?
Just thank you. Yeah, thank you for hearing the feedback and working on this new draft. I really appreciate it.
Welcome.
And we still have the goals of getting to a place.
Yeah, there's still the goals, there's still, a lot of what we heard, I think, if she's listening, Susan Clark sort of I tried to reframe a lot of the questions about access and participation away from how we meet, how the technical way that boards and commissions meet, rather to the broader question of access and participation more broadly, and that can mean a lot of different things. It even can mean whether or not there's food at annual meetings.
Which always really our intent has been accessibility, but capacity, we really had to embrace the fact that the capacity and the feasibility was a challenge for some of the guys.
Right, but some towns meet those accessibility, or some boards meet those accessibility by having a hybrid meeting, but not all.
Exactly. And in Woodstock, 2 of our select board members are able to participate because they have young kids. I mean, the hybrid piece is just a lifesaver for them.
So Tucker, if you could take it away and just walk us through the bill, that would be great.
Good afternoon, Tucker Anderson, Legislative Counsel. You have in front of you draft 4.2 of the committee's amendment to S55. Throughout draft 4.2, I have highlighted the provisions that have changed from the last draft that you saw, and I will note where things have been taken out.
Or add.
The added pieces will be highlighted, so noted them by default. They're all yellow. All right, so we're gonna work first within section 2.
I got 4.1. Me too. Got it.
That's why you had it there.
Got it. Yeah, I just saw the 4 part.
All right.
Section 2, which is amending 1 VSA section 312, which are the open meeting law procedures. This is the bulk of the work the committee has done within the open meeting laws in this section. On page 3, in the hybrid meeting requirement language, this has probably already been generally noted for you, but the change here that is highlighted at the bottom of page 3 was specifically apply the hybrid meeting requirement to public bodies of the state, as opposed to its political subdivisions or municipalities. So any public body of the state, except for advisory bodies and the Human Services Board, this is existing language from the previous draft, shall hold all regular and special meetings in a hybrid fashion. Moving on to page 4. These are 2 new duties in subdivisions B and C of subdivision 3 that are ported over from the requirement for recording and posting. So they shall electronically record all meetings and for a minimum of 30 days following the approval and posting of the official minutes for a meeting, retain the recording and post the recording in a designated electronic location. So same 2 requirements from what was previously subdivision 7, but moved up and applied to public bodies of the state, except advisory bodies and Human Services Board.
Yeah, and just to note why the Human Services Board is exempt from the hybrid meeting. They're not exempt from open meeting law. They're just exempt for the hybrid requirement, because we got testimony from them that they hear quasi judicial cases on individual appeals for human services like Medicaid or child care assistance or whatever, and they're very personal. And so coordinating those and forcing them to meet in hybrid really makes sense. That's like an individual person. Go ahead. Actually, there's another thing I want to note about. One thing to note that Tucker and I discovered as we were doing this research on state boards and hybrid meetings, is that the Public Utilities Commission is completely exempt from open meeting law. And I did not realize that. And they have been since 1988. So we might get them back in here to talk to us about that because that may be a little concern. Better way.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did just have one question for you, and I don't know if you're tracking this bill, but I had heard through the grapevine that essentially the CUDs also have a bill where they might be exempt from this.
So
I don't
there
know.
is a bill, S-199, and that was gonna talk to you all that, but since you brought it up, I'll just read it. It was just passed out on finance, it's on our calendar, we passed over it today on the floor. I have an amendment that takes out the section that would exempt them from what we're doing in S1 and S55. So that they would have to do what every other board does as of S55, whatever we end up passing. So I would love for the whole committee to support that amendment, to sign on to that amendment.
But we don't need to do anything.
We don't have to do it in this, but that's on a different bill, and finance is aware of that and supportive of us doing that.
Thank you for.
And just while we're talking about, it, they are considered a state board.
No,
What are they
they are
considered?
a local board, they would be a municipal.
They're
board.
regional.
Well, I mean, like our AC fiber.
They're a political subdivision. They're essentially what are known as, in the past, union municipal districts.
Right.
They are multiple municipalities that have joined together to form a consolidated district for purposes of communication services. Right.
So we won't have to go down that rabbit hole right now, but there is an amendment which I can share with all of you. Hope the whole committee will find out. Go ahead, Tucker. Thank you.
All right. We're feeling okay, we can move on from subdivision 3 to subdivision 6. There are some updates to the requests for accommodation. And this reflects some of the changes to the hybrid meeting subdivision. So in this subdivision 6, a member of the public or a member of a public body may request that a public body designate a physical meeting location or provide electronic access to a meeting. The request shall be made in writing 3 business days before the date of the meeting. And then if you're with me at the top of page 5, in response to that request, the public body shall grant the accommodation unless providing it is infeasible due to a declared state of emergency or a local incident pursuant to section 312A of the subchapter. So a member of the public or member of the public body makes the request either to designate a physical meeting location for the meeting, or alternatively to have the meeting held simultaneously through electronic means. That request must be granted, provided that the procedural requirements submitted in writing 3 business days in advance of the meeting, unless there's some sort of declared state of emergency or a local incident.
And this would apply to all public bodies, so
Correct.
even the advisory
Even the
ones. So
advisory
the
ones.
advisory ones are meeting fully remotely and somebody says, hey, I can't attend your meeting fully remotely, I need to be there in person. They have to grant that request. So that members of the public would always have access to the meetings. They needed the access. The one thing, Tucker, that I forgot to mention to you is that the word accommodation.
Oh, access.
I think Senator Clarkson and I had talked about changing that to access, so a request for access. And then every time it says accommodation, changing to access, because it doesn't have to just be for people with disabilities. It could be for people who have childcare issues or
out of town.
don't have a car or don't have internet or whatever. It's not, so accommodation sounds more like a disability request, and this is more just an access request.
There are 3 instances.
Right, adding that to my notes. Moving through a few of the sections here into section 5, which is on page 8. Talk about this in combination with section 6, which runs on to page 9. These are the sections that relate to the informational meetings that precede either floor votes or any Australian ballot vote. The language here is updated to state that those informational meetings shall be video recorded, and a copy of the recording shall be posted in a designated electronic location until the results of the annual meeting have been certified. So what is removed from this is the requirement that these be held as hybrid meetings. And in its place is a requirement that they be recorded and available to the public through an electronic location until the results of those elections, those meetings have been certified.
And the annual meeting, the annual meeting votes, they do get certified, yes? Or so that was the thing that I was thinking, these were Australian ballot votes that are then certified. So the thought was to have the recordings there in case there's a revote that has to happen, so people can still see the recordings until the vote is certified.
Yes, Australian ballot votes are certified because
Yeah.
they're counted by election officials. I will check what the exact language has to be for the Viva Voce votes that are
Yeah.
overseen by the moderator,
Right.
because the moderator may certify the vote in person there at the meeting at the conclusion of the actual vote.
Okay. Whatever that is called, you can put in.
There are some mechanisms, of course, for things like reconsideration.
Yeah,
That happen much faster before meetings because a motion for reconsideration has to happen before the next item is taken up
right,
at the meeting, but
right.
I'll take a look at the language.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Senator Watson. You have a
Thank
question?
you. I just wanted to check the provision about moving the date up.
Yeah.
Or like, that's still in here?
That's still-
Okay, thank you.
It's on page 10,
I just hadn't.
If you look at page 9,
or 9, sorry.
line 3.
Oh, there it is. Thank you.
10 to 30.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
I live to serve.
We count on that.
Section 7. This is going to be the working group. There are some comprehensive updates in here that I'll move through with you, and you likely already heard this before I was able to get into the room, but there is some combination of previous section 8, which governed best practices and guidelines that were going to be adopted by the Secretary of State. It's been incorporated into the language here in section 7. So the working group is now called the Working Group on Participation and Accessibility of Municipal Public Meetings and Elections, and that corresponds with some of the updates governing not just accessibility, but increased participation. Subsection A, in addition to updating the name, the duty here is to study and make recommendations to improve the accessibility of and participation in meetings of local public bodies, annual municipal meetings, and local elections. The membership has been updated so that you're no longer dealing with a 3-member board. You have 2 designees from VLCT, 2 designees from VMCTA, 2 designees from VSBA. These are new members in subdivisions 4 through 6, a designee from Disability Rights Vermont, 1 from the League of Women Voters, and finally, the Secretary of State or designee who shall be chair. So the group will not elect a chair, the Secretary of State or designee chair. Subsection C has the most comprehensive changes here. These are updated duties for the study and report that will be submitted by the working group. So first, recommending best practices for running effective and inclusive meetings. Subdivision B, this was a previous section 8. This is recording meetings of municipal public bodies and the means and timeline for posting those recordings for public access. So the previous subdivision 7 in 1 VSA 312A that required all public bodies to record and post has been substituted by separating out the state public bodies that are going to record and post. And then here having the working group look at best practices for municipal public funds, recording their meetings and posting them. They shall investigate means for increasing voter interest in serving on local public bodies, identifying technical assistance, training for municipalities to run effective and inclusive public meetings, studying the current level of accessibility to physical locations and polling places, and what improvements are necessary for citing those locations. Subdivision 5, feasibility studies of using electronic platforms to support remote attendance and voting, expanding use of the Australian ballot system for increased voter participation in elections. Subdivision 6, investigating whether increased use of accommodations such as childcare, hearing devices, translators, transportation, I promised I would mention this, food, and hybrid meetings could increase participation in local public meetings. And finally, to study other topics that the group deems necessary for the purposes of the working group. Subsection D, working group is still getting assistance from the Secretary of State, but there's a new line here that states that the Secretary of State may hire a consultant to provide assistance to the working group.
Given it's an election year, for some of it.
The report has been bumped out from November 15, 2024 to November 1st, 2025. And the number of meetings has been increased from 4 to 6. Finally, in subsection H, the appropriation for the working group has changed. Previously, it covered per diems and compensation and was $2,000. This is an appropriation for $50,000 from the general fund to the Secretary of State for two purposes. The first is to cover the per diems and expenses, which will probably be between $3,000 and $4,000. Probably get good figures from JFO. And then the remainder is for hiring a consultant that will support the working group. And there you have it.
Thank you, Tucker. Are there any questions, for Tucker? Okay. I think we're gonna move on to, since we have most of our witnesses in the room, to hear from witnesses, and then we'll have a sort of committee discussion on next steps for this bill. I will also note that I would really, just for timeline purposes, like to vote this bill out on Tuesday
of next
of next week. So what we need to do in the next few days in order to get this to a point where we feel comfortable voting it out, given that timeline. So we are gonna hear Eileen. Eileen is on the screen, but first I think what we're gonna do for everybody, since we'll just introduce the entire committee for everybody in the room and on Zoom, so we don't have to do it multiple times. And then we'll move to Eileen if she's ready, otherwise we'll skip and come back to her. I'm Senator Ruth Hardy, I represent the Addison District.
Olivia Parker, I'm the committee assistant. I'm Connie Bigowski, Chittenden Central.
Hi, I'm Rebecca White and I'm from the Windsor County District.
Senator Bob Morris, Franklin County, and Town of Albert, and Glendale County.
Senator Ann Watson for the Washington District.
Allison Clarkson, Windsor County District.
So that is the committee. Eileen, are you there up on the screen? Awesome. Hi.
Hi, sorry about the light behind me.
That's okay. That's okay. Thank you for joining us. You heard us walk through hopefully the new bill, the new version of the bill. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the new version. You may have prepared testimony before you saw this, but it would be great if you're able to tell us your thoughts on the new version of the bill. Let's start with introducing yourself for the record and who you are and where you serve.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Eileen Chute. I am on the Putney Select Board. I'm the chair at the moment. That's a little bit about me. I also work for the town of Brattleboro in the Lister's office, for what it's worth. And yes, you addressed the majority of my concerns, so thank you very much for that. And I also want to thank you so much for all the work that you do every day. I have a renewed appreciation for public service, having been on the select board in Putney. So, yeah, so I did want to say that Putney does run hybrid meetings. We also have Putney Select Board does. We also have our meetings live streamed on BCTV, which is the local access channel. That works pretty well. It is there is an art to running a hybrid meeting that I think is something that a lot of our chairs actually struggle with. They would like to get, the work done, especially the planning commissions and the conservation commissions would rather just do the work than scan the room for public comment. So I welcome this working group and the a chance to maybe put some input into that, the things that have worked well for us. I did notice that there's no representatives from local boards on that committee. Would there be a chance to have this sort of testimony in those working groups? I'm not sure how those work.
Absolutely.
There are multiple appointees from the VLCT and from school boards and from the Clerks Association, and usually those appointees are local people.
Okay.
Yeah, and so there, I would assume that VLCT, well, I shouldn't assume, they would probably appoint somebody from 2 different towns in the state that serve their town in some way. And yes, these types of committees often take testimony in the same way or reach out to stakeholders, and we could even put some language in here saying that they have to reach out to stakeholders, if that would make people feel better. That's something easily we could add.
But it is generally assumed.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I mean, we do. We've had some learning curves, and I can definitely give some insight as to how not to do it. So I guess that's all I have to say since the requirement has been taken off. I'm really glad that you went that way. I was already envisioning how that was even going to work.
And can I just ask you specifically you saw the provision about request for access?
Mm-hmm.
Would that be feasible for you all to meet if somebody says, hey, I need to have remote access or in-person access?
Well, the issue there is when, for instance, when we just recently had a physical walk, joint planning commission and select board meeting where we invited the public to physically go on a walk on a road to talk about a proposed sidewalk. There's no way to put a hybrid option in there.
Right. We could put an exception for that kind of meeting, emergency meetings, site visits, special meetings, because those are harder to.
Yeah, I just caution, not to make open meeting law too complicated, because it's complicated enough as it is, and it's disappointing to have to cure unintended violations when really all you want to do is the work of the town.
Yes, I hear you. And we also are trying to make sure that members of the public have access to the public meetings. And so that's the balance we're trying to get. And it's a difficult balance, but
Absolutely.
Yeah, we want the boards to be able to operate, but we also want members of the public to be able to access those public meetings. So yeah, that's the tough one.
Yep. No, and I definitely share that. Thank you.
Senator Hikoski?
So you're already doing hybrid meetings, so I guess I'm confused why you were concerned if hybrid meetings became mandatory, that would impact you if you're already doing them.
Because there are times when we don't have hybrid meetings. We do, sometimes we do working sessions. And it's just too much work to set up the machines. And for select board in particular, we have BCTV doing the recording, and they stream us. So we don't, so they're our camera in effect. When we don't have them there, we don't have a very good setup. It's basically a laptop like this with the camera on the laptop. So it's poor quality. It's not very easy to include the public in those meetings. That's one reason. The other reason is if for some reason the technology goes down, and sometimes it does, we'd like to be able to complete the warrants, for example, without having to wait to put the meeting back up. And I understand there's probably ways to accommodate that in the law. I just don't want it to be so complicated that we're wondering if we're allowed to continue the work of the town if the meeting goes south.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions for Eileen? Eileen, thank you so much for your time today and for your service to your town. That's, we all know how hard it is to serve at the local level, so thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and have a good day.
You're welcome, you too. And Eileen, if you were able to put your thoughts in writing, and provide revised written testimony, that would be really helpful so that we have written testimony before and after.
I can do that.
Send that to Olivia.
All right, I'll do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, take care.
You too.
Next, we have George Blakesley. George, I see your name up on the screen. Are you there? George Blakesley, Mr. Blakesley?
From Guildhall.
George from Guildhall, come.
Dial again.
George?
As the sister
Okay.
of a George, I have many terrible George-related jokes.
Okay, can you hear me now?
There he is.
Okay, I'm trying to get my video on. It wasn't gonna let me come.
Okay,
Can the host turn on my video? There we go.
there you go. Hi, George. First of all, do you hear when we all introduced ourselves for you?
I did, yes.
Okay, and you heard the walkthrough of the new bill, the new version of?
Not the very beginning. I had a question about that. Is S55 as currently revised still gonna be a mandate for select boards?
No, so draft 4.2 is on our website for you to look at, but no, the hybrid requirement would be for only state level boards.
Okay, good. Well, that was one of my major concerns. With that said, I still would like to put before you a number of factors. First of all, I'm the town clerk and treasurer here in Guildhall. We're the county seat of Essex County, up here in the Northeast Kingdom, right along the river.
Okay, great.
And we're very, very rural. Our town has 262 residents. And almost no infrastructure. And that's my first concern. If you're lucky, if you have DSL level internet. Secondly, there's cost involved here. And for a small town, it may not sound much to a big town, but it's a lot of money for startup, and I'll describe that in a minute. Thirdly, as you yourselves know, you need a host to run this thing, to keep an eye on the internet and people, and when they raise their hand and whatever, people conducting the meeting don't have the time or inclination to do so. If you want full participation, you need yet another person, which in a small town is hard enough to get people. I hold 4 roles in this town alone: treasurer, clerk, moderator, and lister.
Wow,
And resident
you have many hats.
and taxpayer.
Well, taxpayer for sure, yeah. And lastly, and nobody's mentioned it yet, but I'm very concerned about cybersecurity, and I'll explain why, especially in our particular setting. I apologize for my voice. I've come down with a cold.
Oh.
I'm doing my best here. Hopefully,
No, you're fine. I'm sorry that you're not feeling well.
Thank you for not coming in person and having us in. We greatly appreciate that.
yes, I thought of that. Yes. So let me address infrastructure. We do belong to a CUD, the Northeast Broadband CUD, but it's not clear when we'll ever get fiber in town. Every time it's like a closely held secret, I guess partly because they don't want to promise something they can't deliver. DSL is okay, and I'm doing okay now with you on it. But if this were tonight, evening time, DSL degrades in bandwidth as more and more people get on. Right now in this town, most everybody's gone off to work. So it's not a particularly heavily used system. So I'm not sure we presently have the capacity in bandwidth to actually run hybrid meetings. That would be functioning. I mean, honestly, I've done some speed tests. If we get 10 gigabyte down and 0.5 up, we're really doing well. It's a very slow system. Even worse, we have almost no cell service. We have a lot of hills around here and very few towers. And for instance, I don't have cell service. I can get cell service if I'm near an internet because I can do Wi-Fi calling, but that's the best we can do. We do have landline and it works. And during COVID, that's how we did our hybrid meetings. People who wanted to called in on a telephone and it worked just fine. Also easier to operate because didn't have to keep looking at a screen, and the telephone tends to be pretty reliable. In terms of cost, startup costs are tremendous here for a small town. You're talking a minimum, and I'm conservative here, $5,000. You're gonna need a computer, a cart, an owl, which is a fascinating little device that would make the meeting really usable and accessible, and the sound functional. And we're going to have to create an access point for it, and preferably physical and not wireless for security reasons I'll come to in a minute. $5,000 is 1.1 penny on our very small budget in this town. That's 1.5% of our budget would suddenly go to something that would get used at most a couple hours a month. I'm not sure it's cost effective. That said, in terms of internet access and users, if Northeast Kingdom Broadband comes into play, they're currently suggesting that their basic 50/50 service is going to cost $80 a month. And a lot of the people who would need access because of its difficulty getting out to meetings physically are typically older folk on a fixed income. And they probably don't even have internet now because the cost is prohibitive. So I'm not sure that even if we were able to set it up, that any greater participation would start to occur.
Yeah.
I've mentioned the host. You yourselves have, I believe, Olivia. There's probably your host, I'm guessing.
Olivia does everything for us. Yes.
Yeah. A nearby town does have this. They're fortunate. They've got some fiber, came in from a different reason under a different sort, and they do have hybrid meetings. But one of their town employees comes to all their meetings and runs the thing. And having been there and present, I can tell you there are a lot of ups and downs in getting the internet to work and getting people able to participate and be visible and what have you. And I expect you've experienced that to a certain extent. The church I attend also tries to do it, but it doesn't have a host. And I'd say 20% of the time something happens and you're left with no sound or no video or something. You really have to have a person on hand. And as I say, it's hard to get folk in a town like ours to participate. It's a difficult thing to do. They're all very busy. The younger folk are busy with their families. The older folk are the ones we're trying to reach. So it's a complex situation. So, and lastly, I want to talk about cybersecurity. We would have to, first of all, just to give you a sense of our layout, we only have one town building. It's actually 3 buildings. It's a historic town hall where we hold town meeting and rent out for facilities and functions. We have a historic printer's house office. In 1985, they built a modern kitchen on the back, and they built a connector between the two, which is now a function room. And that's where we hold all our meetings. That space cannot be locked off. Anytime this facility is being used by outside groups, only the clerk's office is secure. If this access point is inside our firewall, it allows the board to have access to files and documents and applications that help run the town. But now it's sitting out there wide open to anybody who's in here wants to plug in and try to hack into our system. If we put it outside the firewall, we'd still be able to broadcast, but you're not going to be very, very useful to the people who are at the meeting in terms of getting to their documents, files and such. We're right back to paper and shuffling and things of that sort. So it's, and I don't want to do a wireless, same, it's even worse in terms of being able to be secure. So how you do that is something that's going to take some study. And I believe I understood from your walkthrough, there's going to be a study committee on this. And if that's true, I think you should add cybersecurity to their list of things to figure out for how towns can do it. And to really, do a survey on what's available out there for communities and what their situation they're facing is in terms of where they can put it. If you've got a secure room, fine. But if you don't, what are we gonna do? And how are we gonna keep it safe?
Yeah, that's a great point. Cybersecurity, so the study committee would look at a whole bunch of things related to how local town meetings are run, municipal and annual meetings and school board meetings. So that's a great thing to add as a consideration.
Anyway, taken all together, I think it's a grand idea. I'm not sure that it's ready for prime time up here in the Northeast Kingdom.
Well, George, thank you so much for laying out, literally drawing in our heads your layout and the situation in Guildhall. And I hopefully you understand that the hybrid requirement has been removed from the bill at this point. It's just there for state boards, which are sort of a different animal. There are as you mentioned, the study committee to look at a lot of different things. So if you want to take a look more at the bill, and if you have any further comments or wanted to send any written testimony, we'd love to have your written testimony on the new version of the bill. I thank you so much for your time today. Are there any questions for George from the committee? Great. Thank you so much for your time today, George, and for all of your work for the town. It sounds like you basically single-handedly run the town, which is not an easy job.
Try to keep it going here. Do I email my comments to Olivia?
To Olivia, yeah, that would be great.
That's how we do it. Well, good. Thank you for the opportunity. I hope you don't mind. I'm going to leave because I'm not feeling so great. So
we understand. Feel better. Take care of yourself, and thanks for your time today.
thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I have my George jokes.
Okay, yeah, me too, Senator. We have Mike Dunges. Wait,
Nailed it.
did I say that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Mike Dunges from Rutland, in person.
Whoa,
Hi.
The relatively new mayor.
relatively new mayor. It's been almost a year, can you believe it? I can't.
Time flies when you're mayor.
We served with the old mayor. The old.
All right. Well, you have heard the discussion, you heard the walkthrough. Hopefully you've been able to rethink everything in your mind and
I
have
have lots of notes
updated.
that I've.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
So introduce yourself for the record and let us know what you think.
Sure, my name is Mike Dunges. I am currently the mayor of Rutland City. I say currently because prior to becoming mayor, I spent 22 years as a technologist. This is my world. The last 9 years, I actually worked for a major IT company, and one of our largest products was hybrid meeting technology. So, and I spent a lot of time.
Maybe you'll get appointed to this study committee.
I am going to text Ted as soon as we're done. I first want to say I see the value of what this original and even the current format of this bill is trying to do. I think you started using the word accessibility, and it's kind of changed to access. And I think access is a key component. So let me talk a little bit about Rutland City, where we're at, where we're headed, and why I think the current version of this bill is probably the one I would ask you to continue to support. I think it's 14.2.
4.2.
4.2. You know, I haven't done 14.
It's not quite 14.
And with maybe a few other things that I can help you think about. Rutland City 2 years ago set aside $125,000 to be able to set up the ability to do hybrid. At that moment, that money still sits there because the task of making our space hybrid for all of our meetings, even our board involvement meetings, is a big undertaking. It's an RFP that we've continued with all of the other priorities and what limited resources we have. We've had to continue to push that RFP back. It's something we want to do, but as a larger municipality, it's become a bit arduous to get there. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Whether it's a small meeting like George that was presenting earlier, right, in a small space, or a larger meeting in our space. We have to think about the full integration of the space that we're in and then the full integration of those participating remotely. Our space holds 11 aldermen. That's our city council. That's how we, that includes our board president. We have a city clerk who sits up front as well, and our city attorney. And then we have our public space. We call it outside the rail because we have this old fashioned rail, which, you know, is very interesting to look at. And then we also have integrated into our meetings right now is the ability to broadcast those. Our local public education and access television station comes. They try to do it live as much as possible, but every once in a while they have to record. So every one of our meetings is already viewable, maybe not participated in, but viewable on our local PEG TV. We call it PEG TV site. You can also download it from YouTube. Us getting to a point of hybrid, not just from a technology standpoint, I'll get back to technology, I promise, but not just from a technology standpoint, has been a little bit of a path. We had to adopt a new version of Robert's Rules because of the way our board rules were written. We had to adopt one of the most recent versions of Robert's Rules that allows for hybrid meetings because our board rules didn't allow for it, even though state and open meeting law may have even during time of COVID. So we have a little Venn diagram on here, right? An open meeting law meets the rules of our board and Robert's Rules, and then meets the hybrid meeting. There's a tiny little spot in there where everything comes together. Things that we ran into just when we were running hybrid meetings over the time period that we were doing it is voting became a challenge. So whether it was a roll call vote, you know, just a regular vote, or even the secret ballot, which we do have secret ballot votes still in our board, we needed 3 different technologies to be able to support each one of those because the typical hand raise in Microsoft Teams or in WebEx isn't considered, you know, a real method of voting because there's no way to see that that's not just somebody asking a question, right? So it became a bit of a challenge for us and our city attorney. You know, of course, yes, you could make adaptations, but there were real challenges. Some people said, well, I didn't raise my hand to vote, and it became a bit of an issue. So the systems that we were looking at, the reason we set aside so much money to do this is because we were looking at systems that we could have those voting tabulation services built in. We wanted the systems to be easily accessible. I have people on the city council and they run their committees that are as young as 24 years old, shouldn't have a problem running the meeting, all the way up to people who are 85 years or 70 years old, I'm sorry, who don't have that technology skill set and admittedly don't want to learn. So when we set up a system for hybrid meetings, it needs to be a system that people can walk in, push one button and run the meeting. That isn't setting up a laptop, setting up a camera and being able to get the audio working, the video working. I mean, just today, you had 2 participants on the meeting. It took a couple extra seconds. We had lighting issues, we had audio issues, and internet issues can be a potential challenge. So we want to do it correctly, which is why we're taking the time to go through that process. I know this is a long-winded, but the idea being that there's 4 key areas, right? The money that you need to spend on it, the amount of rooms you need to support. We hold our committee meetings in 2 other conference rooms as well. So we have our main room that we would need to outfit, and then our 2 other spaces. And they're large enough where, again, a laptop and a camera is not going to work. George had mentioned an Owl. There's other technology out there as well. Each piece of those equipment, right? This thing is great. Each pieces of those equipment, they're relatively expensive. Then the ability to automate that takes dollars. Somebody actually has to program it for your space and how you want to use it. We also have to think about things like executive sessions and how we move from a non-executive session to an executive session with somebody who's not technically capable. And then the last piece of the puzzle is support. When the system is not working, do we stop our meetings? Do we wait? Now I know the hybrid requirement is gone, which is awesome. And I do think that at some point hybrid requirement is not a bad idea, but I think there's still a bit of a runway there. And I think the finances to support having the technology set up properly for a municipality as large as mine or as small as George's, there's not that much of a gap in between. But that support is offered by a lot of these companies, but it's quite expensive. It can be up to $60,000 a year just to have them on standby to be able to pick up the phone and answer when you need them to troubleshoot the technology. So the costs can grow and there are yearly subscriptions as well. I do want to talk about I do want to pivot, because again, you've changed the bill, and again, I like to support this version. But I do want to pivot for a second to talk about the accommodation / access piece. If you're going to have that shall in there, I do think that leaving the grant money in that you removed is probably a good idea. $250,000. I know it sounds like a lot of money, but when you spread it between 251 towns, to have some money in there for them to invest, to be able to meet the requirement of the shall is gonna be a big deal. Not everybody will need investment from the state. But there are certainly communities that may not have a budget to be able to meet that requirement. So I wouldn't necessarily get rid of that, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah.
What's that?
The access, if somebody asks for access.
So because-
then they shall.
Right, which, so there's still a requirement to potentially hold hybrid, right, even for that access, which I
Right.
think is great. I actually really like the fact that you're saying, we want these meetings to be as accessible, so if somebody needs an accommodation, fantastic, but if we're gonna keep that accommodation in there, then I think just knowing the other municipal leaders that I work with, some funds to be able to support that would be great. And in those cases, a laptop with a camera and a speaker will probably suffice for that one thing. And luckily, we do have some great technology with our public education and government access systems where they can do some integration and help us out, and ours has been fantastic. I wanna make sure I got everything down. The field visits were mentioned by the previous person as well. If we go out to the field, making that a hybrid meeting can be difficult, but there's always grab a cell phone and go, right? So just remember, we can't vote on field visits and things like that. And then again, making sure, and I think the way you have it planned out, the Secretary of State and the working group, making sure that whether it's board rules or Robert's rules are properly in place for the voting in hybrid meetings. Those are some points. The one example I'll give you that I think is so evident as to why these systems are technically complicated is the Vermont judicial system. I don't know if you've been into a courtroom in the last few years, but they fully implemented telepresence and connectivity for hybrid meetings. But in every single courtroom, for every single court case, there is a post there running that meeting technically. And that is not because the judge can't push the button and get the meeting started, but because there are technical issues. It's because of the people coming online. The biggest challenge in these hybrid meetings isn't the room once it's set up. It's the remote participant and their computer technical support and making sure that they can participate, be heard, and hear what's going on in the room. And that technical support is so important to have today. I think in the future, just where things are going, 5 years from now, I think it'll be almost seamless. We've gotten closer every year, but I still think today that's a big challenge. So whatever that case, having a technical advisor or maybe a way that, and maybe this falls to the working group, but a way that there, maybe the VLCT has tech support for this type of thing, where they can help your board get through that, especially in those evening meetings, would be very beneficial. So I'll stop there. Sorry for the long-winded.
No, you're fine. The tech support, are you talking about tech support for the instances where somebody requests access?
Yeah, so think about, yes, where somebody requests access, or you're not doing required hybrid meetings, but like shared, like even if you're not requiring those hybrid meetings, participants sometimes struggle. And again, if we're talking about participants that maybe can't physically make the meeting, they may struggle to use their computer to get into the hybrid meeting. Having them be able to call someone and say, I'm having trouble getting into the meeting, so that they still have that access that they've been trying to.
Okay, so in the few cases where somebody might request access.
That's right.
Because I think it's gonna be a hard sell to say we need a grant program for getting to
That's totally fair.
these very small. I mean, what we heard from a lot of towns was in like a town like Guildhall, probably almost nobody would ask for access via internet because they don't have high-speed internet. So I think it would be a tough call to convince our colleagues that spending $250,000 for these very small times is few times would be beneficial or necessary, but I
Go ahead.
yeah, no, I mean, I
Can I
agree
respond to
that
that,
there,
Frida?
yeah, go ahead,
Okay, great. I don't disagree. It may be a tough sell.
yeah.
But you're putting a technical requirement that does not currently exist today.
Mhm.
That's a whole new investment for certain communities that may not be doing this. That whole new investment They may not have the funds in their budget to be able to do it. And if that shall is a shall, if they have to provide, even in those few times, just because it's one meeting, one time per 1 year, that's still an investment in, at the very least, a piece of technology for them to be capable of doing that. So just keep that in mind. If you're gonna, it's either provide some benefit or grant to meet the shall or remove the shall from that.
Well, so this is a compromise, because it's either this or we go back to the requiring you all to do hybrid meetings. So this was the compromise.
It's a good compromise.
And so I want to hear from towns how you're gonna make this work, because this is the compromise. And so
I think
if you're telling me you need $250,000 to meet this compromise, that's not gonna happen. And so what I'd love to hear from you as a technologist is there are lots of ways that we could make this work. We could do it on our phone.
sure.
We could do it by having somebody else come to the meeting in that instance where somebody needs to participate, and that for that one meeting a year that somebody's requesting access, we can have an extra person there, a volunteer or whatever.
I think those are
I'd love
great
to hear
ideas.
those kinds of suggestions from people, because this is a big compromise that we're trying, I was trying to like,
It's a big comment.
So I hear you that there are probably gonna be times when it's gonna be hard. But I think there are a lot of really creative people out there who can try to make it work, and I'd love to hear,
I think that's a
So-
fantastic point, right? If the requirement isn't for this compromise, if the requirement isn't a full video suite with voting access, then I think you can easily solve that with a conference call, right?
Yeah.
And using a cell phone, and during COVID, we did that.
exactly.
Right?
We just came off of 2 to 3 years of people being creative to try to figure out how to make things work during the pandemic. So if somebody is calling and like, I need to be at the meeting tonight, but I have a sick kid and I need to zoom in for this one meeting.
Right.
Can you accommodate me? Or they're writing it, because we said they had to be in writing, and it could be either a board member or a member of the public. I think our towns can be creative enough to figure that out in these instances where it's a sort of one-off.
I don't disagree if you give them the space to do that in the bill, right? So hybrid meetings typically mean voice and video with technology integration, so you can share documents and presentations. So if you say up to, conference calls, or if you say things of that nature, then fine. Hybrid meetings usually will include, at least in general knowledge, that.
It just says electronic access to it.
Then that's
It
fantastic.
says physical meeting location or electronic
Yeah, you're right.
access. That's all it, and so there aren't standards for like how good. I mean, obviously, ideally, it'd be really good access, but it's really just to be able to have public participation or board member, whatever, participation in meetings in these occasions.
If that's where this is going, then I think you're totally cool without the grant program.
Okay. Just need to push back.
That's fine. I think that's right.
Senator Bihowski.
Well, to your point, we could have towns that don't have the ability, and I would argue it's actually simpler for all towns to just be set up and able to do it, which means that actually mandatory hybrid is a simpler option, because then you don't have a town that doesn't have the ability, because we provided the grant funding so that every town can meet the shall have a reasonable accommodation, which frankly is already law under the Americans with Disability Act. Yeah, frankly, like that would just make it simpler, because then you're not gonna be in an instance where a town says, oh, we don't have the technology.
Do you mind if I respond?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'll just say is that this is supposed to be beyond disabilities. I mean, it could be like, I have a sick kid at home, which, we
How do you know
accommodate.
you have a sick kid at home 3 days before the meeting?
You could be on a trip, you could be on a business trip, you could be, you're a board member who's, for one variety of reasons. And 3 days may be a challenge if you have an emergency, you're in the hospital with the status.
Oh, I did not call it. You said.
No, I know.
I'm
So just quickly, the opposite side of the argument is if you do end up requiring, right?
Yeah.
That everybody would have this. I'll be totally honest with you with the experience that I do have. $250,000 isn't gonna cut it for anybody to walk in, press the button for the meeting, right? It will absolutely cut it for people who are technically savvy, that have the ability to troubleshoot and move through the process. But there's a wide gap.
Yeah.
So just be aware.
Yeah, we heard a lot of testimony to that effect, and that's, you know, that's why this draft is a result, but I'm saying. Gotta have some give here, we're trying to like thread the needle, and sometimes that's imperfect, yeah. Senator Clarkson.
So I thought you were going to the LCTs providing technical assistance in actually if towns, providing somebody that could go to a town and look at their system and say, you wanna do this? This is what you're gonna need, and help them identify what it is they need going forward. So I think that would be great, and it could be tagged on to what Katie Buckley's doing, because my other part of the question is, if we could figure out with the LCT, if that kind of equipment fit the infrastructure bill grant possibilities, and if we could be asking the feds for some of this in our infrastructure money that we still have through 26. So I actually think that maybe you could help finance some of what we're asking for in this bill. If towns do need some better equipment to meet what the compromise is at the moment. And maybe there is federal money out there. And I think VLCT is a critical partner on the technical assistance and advising. And we've seen how they can do it with a dedicated person like Katie Buckley, who is so super. And I just want to remind everybody that Mike is working on a regular basis with our divine former colleague, Cheryl Booker.
Yes, she's
We
amazing.
miss.
Well, I get to see her every day, so.
You're lucky to have.
I am lucky to have
So give her our love.
her. I will, absolutely.
Did you want to respond?
Just very
Yeah.
quickly, yes, first of all, I happen to really like VLCT and where they sit and how they help out here, and I don't want to necessarily volunteer Ted and the team for
Sure he's
that, for that role, sorry.
I'm volunteering.
But I do think that because of how well connected they are, what comes out of the Secretary of State's office may bode well for a team up between VLCT and the Secretary.
Great partner, yes.
To be able to say, here's a couple of solutions, right? Small, medium, large, and how you can implement it. So I'll talk to Ted about that second.
I do want to note, we have not yet heard from the Secretary of State's office on this version of the draft. They're gonna be in next week, so we need to get their feedback on it, because we gave them kind of a big job. Senator Dukowski.
So the previous version of this bill that did have the mandatory hybrid would not have gone into effect till 2026. And one other compromise that I know I floated was pushing that up till 2027. And I hear you that you have set aside money, but it's been hard to prioritize hybrid access. Would not having a date certain when you need to have that help you prioritize doing it?
Yeah, I think it would. I wouldn't prioritize it any more than it had. I part of the challenge in all reality is this is my first year in this role. And we had a heck of a summer. I plan to have this done by October, and things to push back. And actually, I think to your point, I think having a date certain is great. I think it also could be detrimental if there's penalties involved, because there are communities that have limited resources that might not be able to achieve that based on the things that they have come before them. So I hear what you're saying, and I absolutely agree that a deadline's great. I love deadlines. I don't operate without them, quite frankly. But I have my boards on me to get this done too. So whether the deadline's in paper or the deadline is being communicated to me on a weekly basis, it will get done soon. So.
As a follow-up to that, if the date is 2027 and this report comes back in 2025, that gives us, the legislature, plenty of time to come back and change it if the report indicates that is, but it's set something to say, we have to move in this direction.
Yeah, I think, I mean, again, I'll reference it this way. The statement that this is something that we all need to have at some point is, I believe that wholeheartedly. I wouldn't have done what I did for 9 years if I didn't believe that the ability to people to communicate remotely as well as in person helps us get things done in a very efficient fashion. Even though I sold this technology, I believe that in-person meetings have a different flair to them. You get to make eye contact and see reactions differently and have a different level of communication. But having the ability and the access is so important. So if you want to put a deadline on it and then circle back, I think, I'll make my last statement based in technology. One thing that I think that we miss in government, that we don't miss in the technology space, is something called life cycle management. It's the ability to see where we're starting here, we're moving here, we're completing here, and we're reviewing and doing it again and again until it's better. So if that's the mission of putting those deadlines in there and putting those guideposts to say we're gonna evaluate, come back to it, I'm all for it. I just want you to make sure that they're appropriate for the communities that you're serving.
I think that one of the things, and as I said, when I started going over the bill, at the beginning of the meeting, that is important, and that came out of our last discussion, is that for me, what our goal is participation and access.
Yeah.
Is to improve participation and access to our local meetings. And that can be through a lot of different things. It can be through a hybrid meeting, but it also could be through other means. And so I actually don't think that we should be putting that as the goal, as the hybrid meeting as the goal. The goal should be participation and access. And so part of the solution may be a tech solution, but another part of the solution may be other things that we really can think about. Whether it's transportation or food or childcare or just better meetings that people care about more, that are well run and seem important to their lives. So I think there are a lot of ways to solve it, and in thinking about this a lot over the weekend, that's what I was like. Our goal is not a hybrid meeting. Our goal is participation and access, and how do we do that for everybody? So that's really how I sort of reframed my thoughts about it. I'm gonna get back to you, but Senator Clarkson had her hand up.
Well, to that point, which is and I think that's become the common value, which is what we're trying to expand. Tech systems, I also envisioning is how we improve the quality of our meetings. I mean, this is a great opportunity in a moment for us to say, wow, we just had 4 years of being remote, hybrid, COVID, and we've learned a lot. And what we're trying to build on in this bill is, some of the lessons learned from COVID, which is where I began, with introducing it as remote only. We've come a long way from that. And so part of the technical advice is technical IT, but also we have built in hopes that people will access some of the best practices and some of the lessons learned in how we really run successful and productive distributed teams of how do we function better in this new world and how do we manage our meetings better.
Senator Bielanski.
Thank you. I do, and I just feel like the time I said, I guess a goal is access, but when I think about open meeting law, it's also transparency and it's also accountability. And I think that focusing so narrowly on access is, I think, problematic. And one of the things I think that some of our tech options allow for is increased transparency and accountability.
That is super fair, and we can certainly put that more into the study too. Do you have closing thoughts?
I do.
Because we have two other.
I don't want to take up any more of your time, so thank you very much, first of all. I love the idea of the working group. I think it's critical to get that feedback. I would, like I said, let throw my name in the ring to help participate in that. And then I do want to say that food does make a difference. I know it's so funny because there's a level of when and where and how appropriate, but it's at our long meetings, we get pizza sometimes and
biscotti.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Really appreciate you coming up here. Thanks for your service to Rutland.
Thank you, seriously.
We're gonna move to Clayton Cargill, who's in the room with us. Thank you for your patience, Clayton. You wanna come on up to the table and join us?
Sure, thank you.
And Mark, I know you're still up there on the screen. Thanks for your patience. Yeah.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
So thank
Don't
you,
worry
Clayton,
about
for
it.
your patience as we've had lots of
I'm on a field
conversations.
trip, it's okay.
Oh,
Field
awesome.
trip. I'm in the city.
So if you want to introduce yourself, who you are, where you're from, and then tell us your thoughts.
So my name is Clayton Cargill, and I am a school board chair in Danville, Vermont, of two school boards, the local school board and then also the supervisory union board. But I'm also additionally what would be relevant here is I'm a member of a teeny tiny committee called the Town Meeting Committee in Danville,
Oh,
where we meet in empty rooms that nobody wants to come to, and nobody should. And we talk about how to increase participation and access in Danville for town meetings specifically as a way to branch out.
And you get Kitty and Jane to cook for all your meetings, and that's how you get better participation, all that food.
It would be great if you could. So that, in that meeting, that was one of the reasons that I had some concerns about this, and I collected some information that was really no longer relevant, because you addressed the concerns by and large.
Oh, great.
With, in terms of where the line is on what, you know, whether a committee is advisory, or a board is advisory, who takes action, who spends money, those people, and you remove the hybrid option entirely. In Danville, we're blessed with infrastructure that allows us to have evolved into running hybrid meetings already. The select board runs hybrid meetings. I don't have anything to do with that. I sometimes go to them, but the school board, we run hybrid meetings and we offer access in both ways, via Zoom. And there are some challenges that people talk, been telling you quite a bit about the challenges of being in a meeting and having to be the host and having to do this part. Those are hiccups. Those aren't challenges. Those are hiccups once you get it going. And so the reason I wrote to you originally was because I agree with your intent. And the VSBA sent out a call to action that said a lot of the small towns like Guildhall, who don't have the infrastructure, they would tell you, we cannot do this. And maybe they can't because of the infrastructure, specifically because not the $5,000 and not this piece of equipment, but the wires on the pole. That's where they're gonna have a problem.
Yeah.
And we have the infrastructure, we have high-speed internet, we're almost entirely in Danville, and more coming every day that allows us to allow people to be granted access to these meetings. And so we mostly just have hiccups in terms of, can we get them to come still? Because you're talking about better meetings. There's 2 nights ago, on Monday night, we had a meeting at the CCSU, and we were reviewing 17 policies in a row. There's no way to make that meeting fast. You just have to sit there and you're just taking a lump, right? You're reviewing 17 policies in a row. Nobody wants to come to that meeting. So in terms of better meetings, you could feed anybody you wanted and they'd still be full. So my concerns were how many meetings we're gonna be in. I had a list of all the committees for the select board that they have and the subcommittees, but none of them would fall under this, and the select board would have to do it. So I largely don't have any concerns now. I think that you've met what I've got here. But I do admire your intent. We can increase accessibility, we can increase accountability. And to that point, to increasing accountability, we had last year a situation where our warning was wrong for town meeting for the school board. A warning was wrong. And the written out word for the money, the wrong written out word, and that's the money, and we voted on it, so we voted on it wrong. And what we were able to use to cure it, to make sure that we had all the information correct, was the video that we saved from the hybrid meeting. And I was rewatch a video of the hybrid meeting of a man in the hybrid meeting with a piece of paper that we eventually signed that was wrong, to make sure that what we did, that we intended to do right, and we voted on the right note. So the efficacy of this and the effect of this is largely positive if you can get it off the ground. And if you can get, for the people that spend the money, and the people that make the actions on behalf of the towns, make them accountable in a separate way, it decreases the it makes people not think you're back from dealing in these small meetings, these meetings that nobody goes to, because you can point them to the minutes, and then you could say, if you need to in some way try to figure out what somebody meant, then you can watch the video and you can hear what they're saying and what they're saying.
So to that point, one of the things that we had in here before was a requirement about video and posting the video, and we had a lot of conversation about how long to have the video posted.
You had 30 minutes. Right?
Yes, so that came out, and except for state boards, so I mean, do you think we should have that back in for the local boards?
We also on YouTube, and nobody watched. So we have 30 people watch the meeting. But yeah, I don't think you should have it. I think that you should consider it going forward. I think
part of the task force meeting.
Yeah, when the task force talks about what is possible, if you put those up on YouTube next to your town's basketball games, they just sit there and they don't bother anybody. And then if you need to go back to them, there they are. If you host them locally, then you start running into storage issues. So you have to have a way to someplace to put them to save them, because you start running into bandwidth issues and overall.
Well, that's why we only have the 30-day requirement.
Yeah,
Is that,
but then you lose that tool. You lose that tool for accountability going forward, even in the minutia. You lose your chance for minutia. You can pick back up where you were because you can contextualize your own minutes.
Right, so I guess my question was, should we put the requirement for the video back into the bill?
For the state level, at
At
the
the
way it currently
local
exists, at the local, it wouldn't bother me, but no, probably you would get a lot of pushback again.
Yeah.
You would get the same pushers, and they would push the same back as you previously had.
Mhm. I do think that, and you and Mark are both, the school board members, I do think that school boards in many cases are further ahead, from towns, because you are part of a bigger infrastructure. You often have staff who have technology skills that
We're
are.
guaranteed to have professionals in the building with computers.
Exactly,
And
exactly.
as you go down the list, if I were to write the list of all of the different things, you get to a much wider array of personalities and people with skills, and like the people that would be on our dog park committee, or the people that would be on our conservation committee aren't the people that are gonna walk in with a computer to the meeting. They're gonna walk in, if you're lucky, with a pet. Or they're not gonna walk in at all. If you walk into a building full of educators, they're all gonna have their computers with them, and they can just pop them open. So that's, a lot of that is just the infrastructure that exists inside of the school.
Yeah, not just the individuals, but the
The stuff,
the stuff that's in schools, yeah, yeah. Well, if you would be willing to write up some written testimony, that would be great to have if you have the time, just based on this draft and any thoughts you have that you just shared with us, that would be great. And send them to Olivia. But are there any other questions at this point, or more things to say, Clayton?
Just love to be reminded of the size of Danville.
We're about 1,800 registered voters, about 2,500 people.
And what participation rate do you get at town meeting?
So here's the thing, you have to treat last year as an anomaly. You cannot possibly say, what did you get last year? And then have that be the number that you talk about.
Why not?
Because on this date last year, we had no idea we were gonna have a town meeting. There was no way to know if you're gonna have an in-person meeting or not. So it's just with the, so that's just a pickle. So we're dealing with that. We had 130 people at last year's town meeting. But 4 town meetings ago, we had 250 people, so like a 10.
Yeah, so
like
in 2019, you had.
It's a 10%, 12% of, and it's, when we have a major issue, and a major issue in a small town like that is ATVs, and a major issue like that is somebody doesn't like is running for. And then you might have higher participation.
Yeah.
But largely not.
Yeah, the quieter meetings are normally the less
If
controversial.
Well, thank you, Clayton, for your time and for your service to Danville. I'm sure it's very appreciated, and we all know how hard it is, so thank you.
Thank you
for doing it. Last but definitely not least, Mark, thank you for your patience waiting up there. You've probably heard a lot of the conversation already, and hopefully you've had a chance to either hear or see the draft and the changes to it. Thanks, Clayton. Take care. So if you could just introduce yourself and tell us your thoughts at this point, that would be great.
Sure. So my name is Mark Koenig, and for purposes of this hearing, hats I wear are I'm on the Virginia City Council and I'm on the Addison Northwest School Board. Both groups which already do hybrid, and so I know Senator Hardy, in response to my email to her, was like, "Why are you worried about this? You already do it." And it was more the global idea. There are communities that can't. But in the meantime, this committee has stolen my thunder by changing the main points that I was worried about. And Clayton just read my mind on many of the things I was going to say. I am happy that there's a flexibility now, so that municipalities and school boards and other smaller entities have the ability to do hybrid if they can. But you've also created this work group, which is my other suggestion, was study this thing and figure out how it might go forward. And the nice thing with time, especially when technology is involved, is things get cheaper, things get easier, people understand better. So in a few years, small towns that don't have high-speed internet more likely than not will. The cost of the owl is going to go down from 5,000 to 2,000. The cost of having somebody run this becomes easier because at some point it's just going to be Siri, please set up the system, or Alexa, we need to connect this, and it's just going to happen because AI is going to run the world before we know it. So having
No.
some time and having some people look at this is going to be incredibly beneficial. So I can say some things, but really I think most of what I was going to say has been said. So I'm happy for
Awesome.
questions, or I can ramble.
No, that's okay. At this point of the day, I think that we're fine with that. If you're able to revise the email that you sent me and send an update based on this draft, that would be helpful. Because I think we posted a lot of testimony on the previous draft. If you could send in a revised written testimony, that would be helpful if you have the time to do that.
Sure, I can throw something together.
Great. Senator Clarkson has a question.
I have a fairly random but very important question. Are you related by any chance to the great painter Catherine Koenig?
Possibly, but I would doubt it. You know, Koenig is a rather common name in German. It just means king. And if you think of all the kings that you know, yeah. When I was in third grade and learned that I was king, I thought royalty, but it fell away fairly soon.
You are for Jen's royalty.
Oh, my goodness.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Mark, for your time and for your service to the city of Vergennes. Very appreciated. And thanks for spending some time with us today.
Yeah, thanks
Thank
a
you.
lot.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, committee. So we don't have Tucker with us, but I do want to hear, I know that there's concerns. And so wanting to talk a little bit more about our next steps with the bill and knowing that the time and when we're done with the meeting, we can talk about some of the logistics in terms of what's going to happen in the next 10 days because for town meeting break in terms of our time and our schedule. But at this point, let's just talk a little bit about the draft and the reactions. You were not here for the walkthrough, but have you had a chance to go through it? So do you want to go ahead and share?
I mean, I think we need to hear from the disability rights communities, whether they can support this amendment. I think it's actually really problematic. I support the expanded working group, but to ask yet again, people who are shut out of spaces for the onus to be on them to ask to be allowed into those spaces is really problematic. I thought we were already compromising by pushing the date for implementation out so far. And frankly, I don't want to learn is an unacceptable reason to deny universal access to democracy. And that's largely what I've heard from people. Well, people don't want to learn how to do this. I think it's simpler for towns to all just be set up to do it. I think that, and I do think setting a date certain, and I'm willing to compromise to 2027 to give more time for the work and implementation in towns to come up to speed. I appreciate the expansion in the working group, but I don't support the changes.
Okay, anyone else? Weigh in a little bit? Senator Watson?
Sure. I am grateful for the changes. I know that is, I think it would be to help hear from the disability rights folks and, the way I'm hearing this so far is that it should make it easier because it's you don't get to deny a request, right? It's as long as it's, there's not some local incident happening, then that request is gotta be granted. And I guess I feel like I'm hearing more than just I certainly hear like people don't want to learn, but I also hear the logistic issues of places that don't have high-speed internet. And anyway, so I don't know how to necessarily put in the aspiration that we'd like to move in that direction. To do like I do, like I still have that, but I think it's really hard to put an aspiration in the statute. So, but I feel like this is workable, and I feel good about it.
Sure, thank you, Madam Chair. I really appreciate you taking the time to make these changes, and I do think it's a fair compromise. I have just been hearing loud and clear from our small towns that this was not going to make them have productive, better, more open meetings. That instead, the way that we had originally framed up the bill was going to lead them to have technical choices that they had to start to make quicker than they felt they could. And that's enough for me to feel that we should be able to not require it statewide. And I also appreciate that. I think we've come a long way from just having this hype. So where this whole bill, the impetus of this whole bill started, we could have done nothing, and it could have gone completely back to where we were pre-COVID. And we chose to take this topic on, and I think that we've made a very concerted effort to move us in the right direction. And while I have certainly heard from, I mean, it was really interesting to hear the difference between testimony last week and this week, just like the level of like, oh, thank you, like in the change in demeanor and tone. Because I think what we are now setting ourselves up for is to really work with towns now. To be able to have conversations about what are the best types of meetings for your community. And maybe it's not hybrid where you have one dinky laptop and a group of people on the other side of the room because they're trying to connect the power outlet next to the router to have it be hybrid. You know, it's that kind of meeting that I think we were setting ourselves up to have because we were pushing people who weren't necessarily ready for that step to make a real transition. So I'm hoping that out of this, and with the support of the different stakeholders, including everyone who's listed on the working group, that we'll actually get really quality meetings, that every Vermonter can participate in. So I appreciate the work we've done on this. And I'm just happy for being able to have some good answers coming out of the working group as well.
Senator Norris?
It's a big improvement. I'm good with it. As long as it stays the way that it is. Had a lot of suggestions, so.
Awesome. Senator Clarkson?
So I think, as the one who proposed this bill as to making all meetings have the ability to be totally remote. Only a fool doesn't change their mind, and I certainly do not want to be viewed as a fool. I think we've done good work on this, actually. I think we've listened to our communities. I think we have shined a light on the need for more access and more participation, and that the lessons learned from COVID really, because we had in many of our towns increased participation as a result. I think we're really at an opportunity moment here for improving our town meetings, increasing access and improving technology and improving how we work together as communities. And so the one thing we may want to, so I'm good with the changes, and I've had to kind of go 180 degrees, and I appreciate Tanya's concerns. I think what I'd like to maybe put back in is our intent section. Without impacting necessarily, but the working group would then build on some of our intent and hope. So I think in some ways we might want to consider putting an intent section back in to answer some of the values that and identify and put out there, some of the lessons learned and values that we support and that really anchor this bill. So I think those are my thoughts at the moment, and I'm thrilled that it's one of the key things that would occur.
Clark, way to go. Senator Watson?
Thank you. Just this is nitpicky, but I did appreciate the suggestion to add site visits or field
Yes.
visits.
To examine or to.
Yes, yes, I have that written down too, yeah.
And we've heard about I've got that note. And the access piece.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's great to hear where everybody's at, and Senator Vigosky, I knew you would have concerns about the bill.
Yes.
Yeah, and however, I think that compared to where we are right now in current law, that this bill is actually a really big step forward in all four of those, transparency, accountability, access, and Participation, thank you. Because, you know, first of all, we're requiring that hybrid for all the state boards, you know, or the state, you know, legislative boards, et cetera, except for the PUC. If anyone's listening from the PUC, we're gonna have you in. So I think that that's a big step forward for access. And I do think that there is more that we're hearing from our towns besides we don't wanna learn. In fact, I don't think we heard that they don't wanna learn. What I heard, what I think we heard from them is a lot of them are already doing hybrid and they're gonna continue whether this bill requires it or not, because they figured out how to do it and do it well. And the ones that aren't doing it there are generally pretty good reasons why they're not doing it, whether, you know, Guildhall having no high-speed internet or very weak low-speed internet and or having physical location issues, and frankly the sort of ever-present capacity issues that we kind of hear with everything. I mean, having served on a local board, and I mean, many of us know that they're pretty overwhelmed with what they have to do, and they don't have an Olivia and they don't have a tech staff. So I do think that it is, in many cases, with maybe a few exceptions out there, it's really a capacity issue on a bunch of levels.
Yeah.
And the ones that can do it will do it because they want to. And then the working group, I think we can add something about transparency and accountability. I'm not a big fan of the intent section. So, because I think that we end up really like overwording the intent section, and I think our intent is really in the working group and what we're asking for them to do. So
that's fair, although we've just identified 4 really great intent objectives for you know.
And I mean,
it'd be great to have
people
one paragraph.
think we need an intent section, I'm willing to work on trying to find the wording that we can agree on for an intent section. I also have heard that we definitely want to hear from the Secretary of State's office, because we added, this bill has them doing a lot more. So the Deputy Secretary of State has already reached out to Olivia. She's coming, we're gonna hear from her on Tuesday. We can hear from Disability Rights.
VLCT, we should.
We'll hear from VLCT and VSBA. We can, the Prep Association also has reached out to me. And there was one other thought that I just had. The PUC. We're gonna hear from that.
And just in terms of the state boards, does it make any sense to have Kristen, the Secretary of the Agency Administration?
We already heard from several of the state boards. Most of them, you know, the Education, Board of Education, PUC, Green Mountain Care Board, the Human Services Board, which we exempted from the hybrid option for those reasons. I don't know that we need to hear from more of them.
I'm just saying that's one group that we have required this.
Are there other witnesses that we really need to hear from? Okay. So we're gonna go off live right now to just talk about schedule issues